My family only had me to be my brother's spare parts. When I refused to donate my kidney, my brother attacked me, went to prison, and my parents faked his death to manipulate me. I'm 24 years old. I work in an accounting office, and I've been in therapy for like 6 months, trying to process all of this that I'm about to tell you because, honestly, it's one of those things that when you say it out loud, it sounds so twisted that even you yourself have a hard time believing it. Basically, I discovered that my parents had me just to be a spare parts bag for my brother, and when I say just for that, I'm not exaggerating one bit. But let me start from the beginning because this story is long and complicated, and I need you to understand how we got here. I grew up in a normal house, or at least that's what I thought. My brother Vincent is 4 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, he was always like the center of the family universe. You know, the perfect son who never did anything wrong. I was the younger sister, and I guess for a long time I assumed that's how all families worked, that older siblings simply got more attention. Vincent always had the best room, the most expensive gifts at Christmas, and my parents went to all his sporting events but almost never to mine. I remember one time I won an award at school for a science project. It was like a state-level competition and everything, and my parents didn't go because Vincent had a soccer game that same day. It wasn't even an important game, it was literally a practice match. But there they were, screaming from the stands while I received my award in front of basically nobody from my family. My Aunt Brenda was the only one who showed up, and at the time I didn't give it that much importance, but looking back, she was always there when my parents weren't. The thing is, I was a good student. I never got in trouble. I did everything I was supposed to do, but none of that seemed to matter. Vincent could fail a test, and my parents would hire tutors, buy him extra materials, do whatever it took. I got straight A's and barely got a passing, well done. But anyway, that was my life, and I kept moving forward because what else could I do? I graduated high school, got into college with a partial scholarship because my parents said they couldn't pay my full tuition, even though they paid all of Vincent's at a super expensive private university, and got a part-time job to cover my expenses. It was hard. I'm not gonna lie. But at least I was building something of my own. Something that had nothing to do with being Vincent's invisible sister. Everything changed like 2 years ago, when Vincent was 26 and I had just turned 22. Turns out my brother started feeling sick, like really tired all the time, with back pain, and after several months of tests and doctor visits, he was diagnosed with kidney disease. I don't remember the exact name of the condition, something complicated that the doctor explained, but basically meant his kidneys were progressively failing. At first, it wasn't that serious. It could be managed with medications and diet changes, but over time it got worse. Like a year and a half passed of treatments, dialysis, Vincent feeling worse and worse, and my parents were devastated, obviously. The whole house revolved around Vincent's medical appointments, his blood tests, whether he had eaten enough protein that day, or if he had taken his medicines on time. I tried to help where I could. Went with them to the hospital when I could miss work, brought food to the house, that kind of thing. I felt bad for Vincent, seriously, because as much as we weren't super close as siblings, I didn't wish that on anyone. But there was something weird about how my parents looked at me during that time, like they were waiting for something from me, and I didn't understand what it was. My mom started making strange comments like, "How lucky you're so healthy," or "Your blood has always been compatible with Vincent's." Things that at the moment sounded casual, but now, looking back, were like huge warning signs that I just didn't see. About 8 months ago, Vincent got on the waiting list for a kidney transplant. His doctor said he needed one urgently because his condition was deteriorating fast and dialysis wasn't enough anymore. The thing with kidney transplants is that the waiting list can take years, literally years, and meanwhile the patient just gets worse and worse. So my parents started talking about living donors, about how someone in the family could donate a kidney to Vincent and save his life without having to wait on the list. They couldn't, because my dad has diabetes and my mom has high blood pressure, so neither of them qualified as a donor, which, conveniently, left me. One day, like 3 days after those conversations about living donors started, my parents called me to talk. I went to the house thinking they wanted to catch up or something, but when I got there, they were both sitting in the living room with those serious faces, and Vincent was there too, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. My mom started by saying the family needed to come together in this difficult time, that Vincent needed me, that I was his only hope, and I was there like, "Okay, what do you want me to do?" And then my dad just said it directly, said they needed me to be Vincent's donor, that I should get the compatibility tests done as soon as possible so we could start the transplant process. They didn't ask me. They didn't say, "Would you be willing to consider?" Or, "We understand it's a difficult decision." They just assumed I would do it, like it was obvious, like it was my obligation. And honestly, in that moment I was so shocked I didn't know what to say. I just sat there while they talked about dates and procedures and doctors. Like it was all already decided. Vincent wasn't even looking me in the eyes. He was just sitting there with his arms crossed. And I remember thinking it was weird that he wasn't saying anything either. Not even a, "Would you be willing?" Or, "Thank you for considering it." Nothing. I left there feeling super weird, like confused and kind of annoyed, but also guilty for feeling annoyed because, my brother was sick and I was thinking about myself, right? But something didn't feel right. I went home. He lived in a small apartment near my work, and spent the whole night researching about living kidney donations, reading testimonials, watching videos of doctors explaining the procedure. And what I discovered scared me quite a bit. Turns out, donating a kidney isn't like donating blood. It's not something you do, and that's it. You go on with your normal life. It's major surgery, with real risks of complications, and although technically you can live with one kidney, it increases your risk of developing kidney problems in the future. Plus, I discovered the recovery process is long, like months, and I would probably have to leave my job for a while, which meant losing income I needed to pay my rent and my student loans. I also found information about the RAS, costs. And this is where things got even more complicated. Turns out that although Vincent's insurance would cover his part of the transplant, I would have to pay my own medical expenses related to the donation, like the preliminary tests, some of the post-operative follow-ups, and all the time I'd be without work. We're talking thousands of dollars, and I barely had savings because I was paying off college debt. Plus, my health insurance was basic, one of those cheap ones you get when you're young and don't earn much, and it didn't cover much. Like 2 weeks went by where my parents called me constantly, asking when I was going to do the compatibility tests, sending me messages every day, and I kept making excuses because I needed time to process everything. Finally, I decided I had to be honest with them. So I went back to their house and explained my concerns. I told them I had researched and that donating a kidney was something very serious, that it had long-term health risks for me, and that I couldn't afford economically everything the process involved. I suggested maybe we could look for other options, like exploring the waiting list more, or looking for other possible donors in the extended family. My parents' reaction was, I don't even know how to describe it. My mom literally started crying. Not like silent tears, but loud sobs, saying she couldn't believe I was so selfish. How could I put money before my brother's life? My dad was red with rage, yelling at me that I was a terrible daughter, that Vincent could die because of me, that he had given me everything in life, which, by the way, was completely false, but okay, and this is how I was repaying him. Vincent was there too, and he said something that hurt me so much. He said he always knew I was a cold and heartless person, but he never thought I would care so little whether he lived or died. And then my mom said something that changed everything. She was so upset, so out of control, that the words just came out of her mouth without a filter. She said, screaming, "You were born to help him. That was your purpose. And now you're telling me, no?" And we all went silent. My dad turned pale and signaled to my mom like telling her to shut up. But it was too late. I just stood there like, "What did you just say?" And I asked her to repeat it, to explain exactly what she meant by me being born to help him. My mom started backtracking, saying she didn't mean that she was upset. But I couldn't stop thinking about those words. You were born to help him. What did that mean? I left that house and went straight to my Aunt Brenda, my dad's sister, who had always been like my safe person in the family. She lived like half an hour away, in a small house with her husband. My uncle had already passed away a few years before. I arrived at her door crying, like I couldn't even breathe properly. And she let me in and made me tea and waited for me to calm down enough to talk. I told her everything, about the donation, about the fight, about what my mom had said. And then my Aunt Brenda did something I'll never forget. She took my hands, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, "I think there's something you need to know." Turns out when Vincent was 4 years old, long before I was born, he had leukemia. I had no idea about this. My parents never mentioned it. I never saw photos from that time. Nothing. According to my aunt, it was a severe case and Vincent needed a bone marrow transplant to survive. My parents got tested, but neither of them was compatible, and there were no donors in the extended family who worked. So, my aunt explained to me, my parents made a decision. They decided to have another baby, specifically genetically designed to be compatible with Vincent and be able to donate bone marrow to him. I was that baby. They conceived me using a technique called pre-implantation genetic selection, where basically they create several embryos, test them to see which one is compatible with the sick sibling, and only implant that one. I was chosen from a petri dish because my DNA matched Vincent's. I couldn't process what I was hearing. I asked my aunt how she knew all this, and she told me that at the time there was a lot of tension in the family because she and other relatives thought what my parents were doing was ethically questionable. But in the end, Vincent was dying and everyone understood my parents' desperation. My aunt told me that when I was born, they almost immediately did tests and procedures on me to extract cells from my bone marrow and transplant them to Vincent. I was like 6 months old when they did the first procedure on me. Obviously, I don't remember it, but my aunt says it was successful and basically saved Vincent's life. But wait, because it gets worse. My aunt also revealed to me that I wasn't the first attempt. My parents had had 3 pregnancies before me, 3 babies who weren't genetically compatible with Vincent, and each of those pregnancies was terminated. 3 siblings I never knew because they didn't fulfill the purpose they were created for. And I only existed because I won the genetic lottery and was the right combination to save Vincent. My entire being, my entire existence, was designed with a medical purpose in mind. I wasn't wanted for myself. I wasn't conceived because my parents wanted another child. I was literally manufactured to be a spare parts bag for my brother. I stayed at my aunt's house that night because I couldn't go back to my apartment. I couldn't be alone with all this in my head. I didn't sleep at all, just stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying my whole life in my mind, but now with this new information, everything suddenly made sense. The constant favoritism toward Vincent, the way my parents always put his needs before mine, how it never seemed to matter what I accomplished or did. I wasn't really their daughter. I was a medical solution that had fulfilled its purpose when I was a baby, and now they needed me again for the same purpose. A few days went by where I basically didn't answer calls or messages from my parents. I needed space to think, to decide what I was going to do with all this information. My Aunt Brenda told me I could stay with her as long as I needed. And honestly, that woman saved my life in that moment. My boyfriend, Jordan Way, had been dating for like a year and a half, was also amazing. He came to see me and listened to me cry and vent, and never judged me or pressured me to do anything. Finally, like a week later, I went to talk to my parents again. I needed confirmation. I needed to hear it from them. I asked them directly if it was true that they had conceived me specifically to be Vincent's donor. My dad tried to deny it at first, but my mom eventually admitted that yes, they had done it to save Vincent because they had no other choice. I asked them about the 3 previous pregnancies and my mom got super defensive, saying that wasn't my business, that those were decisions they had made in a desperate moment. I told them that their desperate moment resulted in me existing only as a medical tool, not as a real person with my own life. My mom interrupted me and said I was being dramatic, that they had raised and loved me the same as Vincent, which was obviously a lie, and that now, Vincent needed me again, and I had to be there for him. I told them, very clearly, that I wasn't going to donate my kidney to Vincent, that I understood he was sick and I was very sorry, but that my body was mine, and that after discovering I only exist because they designed me for this, I wasn't going to keep fulfilling that role, that I needed to live my own life, not the one they had planned for me since before I was born. My dad told me that if I didn't do it, I was dead to them, that they didn't want to see me again. My mom said, how could I be so cruel? That Vincent was my brother and I was his only hope, but I had already made my decision. I got up and left that house, and that was the last time I spoke to them civilly. What happened next was like a nightmare I couldn't believe was real. Like 2 weeks after that conversation, I was driving my car, a 2016 Honda Civic I had bought used with my savings, back from work when I got pulled over by the police. The officer asked for my license and registration, and then asked me to get out of the vehicle. He said they had reports that my car had been seen in an area where there was drug activity, and they needed to search it. I was like, this has to be a mistake. I've never touched drugs in my life, but I let them search the car because I had nothing to hide. Except they did find something. In the glove compartment, there was a bag with pills that turned out to be OxyContin, a super-controlled opioid. I was in total shock, swearing those pills weren't mine, that someone had put them there, but the officer told me it was my car and I was responsible for what was in it. They took me to the police station and had me there for like 3 hours while they processed everything. I was terrified. I called Jordan and he came immediately, and also called a lawyer he knew. While I was sitting there waiting, my mind was working fast, trying to understand how those drugs got in my car. I always locked my car. I didn't let anyone use it except Jordan, and he definitely wouldn't have put drugs in there. Then I remembered that like 2 days before I had gone to a coffee shop near my parents' house, not their house, but in the same neighborhood, and had left the car parked outside for like an hour while I worked on my laptop. I had left the car unlocked because I was only going to be there a little while, and the area looked safe. Could it be possible that? The lawyer arrived and talked to the police, and after a lot of negotiation, they managed to release me that night, but with pending charges. Basically, my life was on hold, with a drug possession charge hanging over my head, which could destroy my career, my future, everything. Jordan was convinced my parents or Vincent had something to do with it, and I didn't want to believe it because as terrible as they had been to me, would they really be capable of something like that? But then the lawyer suggested we review the coffee shop's security cameras, and there was the proof. The cameras showed Vincent approaching my car, looking around to make sure no one saw him, and then forcing the door open. Apparently my car wasn't as secure as I thought. You could clearly see in the video him putting something in the glove compartment and then leaving quickly. We had video proof that he had planted the drugs. I showed the video to the police, and they immediately changed the focus of the investigation. They went to look for Vincent and arrested him for obstruction of justice, attempted framing, and a bunch of other charges, the lawyer explained to me, but I honestly don't remember well. When they arrested Vincent, my parents showed up at the police station where he was being processed. And here's where things got even more surreal. Instead of being horrified by what Vincent had done, instead of apologizing to me or acknowledging that their son had committed a crime, they blamed me. My mom yelled at me in the middle of the police station that I had caused all of this, that if I had just donated the kidney, none of this would have happened, that Vincent was so desperate because of my selfishness that he had acted irrationally. My dad told me he would testify in Vincent's favor in court himself, that I was the real criminal for denying my brother a chance at life. There were other relatives there too, some cousins and uncles, and they all looked at us like we were a spectacle, and I just wanted to disappear. My Aunt Brenda was also there, and she was the one who got me out of the situation. She took me back to her house and told me not to talk to my parents again without a lawyer present. The following months were absolute legal chaos. I had to testify against Vincent, which was devastating even after everything that had happened, because he was still my brother and a part of me still felt something for him. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison for his crimes, and my parents used all their money on lawyers trying to reduce his sentence, but it didn't work. Throughout the trial process, my parents looked at me with so much hatred that I literally felt their rage from across the room. But wait, because there's still more. While Vincent was in jail waiting for his sentence, my parents started a GoFundMe campaign online to help Vincent pay his medical expenses. Up to that point, okay, I understand they needed money. But the description they put on the page painted me as the villain. They said their son was dying because his cruel and selfish sister refused to give him a kidney, that I had been blessed with perfect health and refused to share that blessing with my own brother. They said Vincent had made a mistake in a moment of desperation, but the real crime was my lack of compassion. The page went viral in local social media groups, and suddenly I was receiving hate messages from complete strangers, people calling me a murderer, telling me they hoped I would die and Vincent would live. It was my Aunt Brenda who suggested I contact the doctor who had treated Vincent when he had leukemia as a child. This doctor, Dr. Foster, was already retired but still lived in the area. My aunt thought he might have medical records of Vincent's treatment that included information about my conception and birth. So Jordan and I went to visit him. Dr. Barrio Dem. Foster was an older man, like 70-something, super kind, and when I explained the situation to him, he got very serious. He told me he remembered Vincent's case perfectly, that it had been one of the most complicated of his career. And then he confirmed everything my aunt had told me. He explained that my parents had worked with a fertility clinic specialized in pre-implantation genetic selection, that they had created multiple embryos and had chosen the one that was compatible with Vincent, that embryo was me. But then Dr. Foster told me something that left me frozen. He said he had had ethical doubts about the whole process at the time, that he had expressed his concerns to my parents, but in the end, the decision was theirs. He told me he kept copies of all the medical records because, in his words, I felt that someday they might be necessary. He handed me a thick folder full of documents, medical analyses, consents signed by my parents, everything. There were documents that clearly showed the genetic selection process. The 3 previous pregnancies that had been terminated because the embryos weren't compatible. Everything was there on official paper with dates and signatures. With this documentation, my lawyer suggested we could take legal action against my parents for several charges related to emotional abuse and manipulation, but honestly, I just wanted it all to end. What I did do was report the case to the corresponding medical authorities, because apparently some of the practices the fertility clinic had used to create designer embryos weren't completely legal at the time. That opened up a whole federal investigation that discovered the clinic had done this with several families, not just mine, and the doctor who ran the clinic ended up losing his medical license. It all became a huge media scandal, with news articles and TV programs talking about the ethics of designer babies and all that. I kept my identity as private as I could, but in local circles, people knew who I was, and the looks and comments were constant. My parents, seeing themselves exposed, got even more aggressive. They started sending messages to all our shared relatives, family friends, old neighbors, telling their version of the story where I was an ungrateful daughter who had destroyed the family. Some believed them, especially people who didn't know all the details. But most, when they found out the truth about how and why I was conceived, pulled away from my parents. My Aunt Brenda cut off contact completely with my dad, her own brother, telling him what they had done was unforgivable. Other aunts, uncles, and cousins also chose my side, which surprised me but gave me hope that maybe not all the adults in my family were completely crazy. But my parents didn't give up. Like 6 months after all this, when Vincent was already in prison and I was trying to rebuild my life, I received frantic calls from several relatives saying my mom had posted on Facebook that Vincent had attempted suicide in jail and was in critical condition. The post said I had caused this, that my refusal to help him had driven him to desperation. I went into total panic, because as much as everything had happened, the idea that Vincent was dead or dying destroyed me. I called the prison. They transferred me through like 5 different people, and finally they told me Vincent was perfectly fine, that there had been no suicide attempt, that he hadn't even gone to the infirmary that day. My parents had made it all up. They had created a false story about a suicide attempt to emotionally manipulate me and make me come back. When I confronted my parents about this, my mom admitted she had done it because I needed to understand the gravity of the situation and that sometimes lies are justified if they save lives. I couldn't even respond. I just hung up the phone. I reported the false post to the authorities because falsifying a suicide attempt is a crime, especially when it's used to manipulate someone. After that, my parents lost the little support they still had from friends and family. Even people who had been close to them for decades cut off contact, disgusted by how far they had been willing to go. Eventually, the legal system processed everything and Vincent was formally sentenced. My parents spent all their savings on lawyers and eventually had to sell their house to pay legal debts. I don't know where they live now. Honestly, I haven't even asked. I changed my phone number, blocked all their social media, and basically erased them from my life. It was hard, I'm not gonna lie, because as much as they had done all those terrible things, they were still my parents, and letting go of that hope that someday things could be different was painful. But it was also liberating. In a way I can't fully explain. It was like my whole life I had been living under this shadow, under this weight of never being enough, and suddenly the shadow disappeared. I kept going to therapy, like twice a week for months, working through all the trauma and pain and anger. My therapist helped me understand that I wasn't responsible for my parents' decisions, that my existence had value beyond the medical purpose I was created for, that I deserved to be loved for who I was, not for what I could provide to others. Like 4 months ago, Jordan and I moved to a different city, like 6 hours away from where I grew up. He got a better job there, and I found a position at a bigger accounting firm with better pay. We started from scratch, and it's been amazing to be able to live in a place where nobody knows my story, where I can just be Ella, not the girl who refused to donate a kidney to her brother or the designer baby. Jordan proposed to me last month at a quiet dinner in our new apartment, Nothing elaborate but perfect. I said yes, without hesitating for a second, because he has been my rock through all of this. He never judged me, never pressured me, just loved me unconditionally. And here's the final plot twist. I found out 2 weeks ago that I'm pregnant. 3 months, according to the doctor. And the weird thing is that when they did the ultrasound and I saw that little spot on the screen that's eventually going to be my child, the first thing I thought was, this baby is going to be loved for who they are, not for what they can do for someone else. This baby is going to grow up knowing they're wanted, that their existence has value in itself. And if they ever need anything from me, a kidney or bone marrow or whatever, it will be their decision as an adult, not an obligation imposed before they were even born. I haven't heard anything more from my parents in months. Vincent is still in prison. He has like 8 months left of his sentence. I don't know what happened with his medical situation, if he found a donor on the waiting list or if he's on permanent dialysis. And honestly, I know this sounds cold, but I can't carry that guilt. I did everything I could to be a good sister, a good daughter, but there came a point where I had to choose between them and myself, and I chose to save myself. Some days I still feel guilty. I still wonder if I should have done things differently, but my therapist reminds me that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's survival. My Aunt Brenda is still part of my life. She comes to visit often and is super excited about the baby. She says she's going to be the best substitute grandmother this kid could have, and I believe her. I've also reconnected with some cousins who pulled away from my parents after finding out everything, and it's nice to have some family that really cares about me and supports me. Jordan and his family have completely welcomed me. His mom calls me Mija, and his dad makes jokes about how now he has 2 daughters instead of just one. It's not the family I was born into, but it's the family I chose, and that means more than I can express. You know, what's the weirdest thing about all this? Sometimes I still dream about my parents, about how they were when I was very little, before everything got so bad. I remember specific moments, like my mom teaching me to ride a bike, or my dad taking me to get ice cream on Sundays. And I wonder if those moments were real, if they really loved me back then, or if even those memories are tainted by the fact that I was always just a means to an end. I'll probably never know the answer, and I guess I have to make peace with that. What I do know is that when this baby is born in a few months, I'm going to break that cycle. They're going to know they're loved without conditions, that their value isn't tied to what they can do for others, that their decisions about their own body are sacred. And if someday they ask me about my family, about their grandparents, I'm going to be honest in a way that's appropriate for their age. I'm not going to lie to them, but I'm also not going to burden them with all this weight. They're going to grow up knowing that sometimes families are complicated, that sometimes the people who should love you fail, but that doesn't define your value as a person. I'm still healing. There are still difficult days where all this hits me again, and I find myself crying for no apparent reason. But there are also good days, days where I wake up next to Jordan and look at our small but cozy apartment, and think about the future, and feel hopeful. I'm building something new, something that's completely mine, and nobody can take that away from me. That's enough for now.